Hey everyone, Shin here. So I just wanted to give you guys my thoughts and impressions on the stability change that dropped in the patch that happened today. For those who are not familiar with what happened, stability was changed from a binary on-off, always there boon, to one that has stacks, similar to might. And instead of you being immune to CC for the entire duration of stability, you now lose one stack for every CC skill you take. So for example, before you would have stability and any warrior hammer skill used on you while you had that boon up would have no effect. Now, let's say you have 2 stacks of stability and you have that warrior use backbreaker plus earthshaker plus staggering blow, you'll be immune to 2 of those, but as soon as that second stack falls off, you'll be vulnerable to the third CC. That's how the new set works. There were a bunch of skills for all classes that were rebalanced and gave different amounts of stacks based on the balancing that the devs wanted to do. For Warrior, the main ones that were affected were Balance Stance, which now gives us 5 stacks, Doliac Signet, which gives us 10 stacks. Last Stand is a trait that pops Balance Stance in the defense line passively. That gives us 5 stacks as well. And Rampage gives us 3 stacks every 3 seconds for the duration of the skill. It's a pulsing effect that mimics the permanent stability we had before, but makes it a bit nicer as far as quality of life goes, and I'll get into that in a little bit. One other thing I want to mention about Rampage in this patch is they actually buffed it with a pulsing swiftness boon as well, so we're actually a bit faster while running Rampage, allowing us to catch targets better, and all around is just a nice quality of life improvement. Now, as far as the game modes, how the meta builds for each mode are affected, PvE and structure PvP, none of those meta builds are really affected by this change because none of them run stability. PvE, you might have a case-by-case basis, but that you can determine based on what I talk about with the Balance Stance versus Doliac Signet a little bit later. And structure PvP, Shoutbow doesn't run any stability, and the Mercy Banner build, that's a case-by-case basis, depends on the person running the build. Some teams may decide they want you to have stability, some may not, depends on the player and the team. So overall, this change really only affects how we Warriors operate in World v. World. That being said, it affects both sides of the coin of World v. World, both the small-scale roaming and the large-scale Zerging GVG setup. I'll start with the small scale, and I'll work my way up as far as how things felt after this change. First off, before I get to Balance Stance versus Doliac Signet, which I know a lot of you are probably curious about, I will say something about Rampage. Rampage feels a lot better thanks to the changes I mentioned earlier. The fact that I can pop Rampage and not have to worry about that stability being permanently ripped for the duration of the skill is really nice, because that was one of the few hesitancies I had about running the skill, was the fact that if I ran against a Mesmer or a Thief, that long stability could get ripped very easily, and then I would be vulnerable to CC for the entire skill duration. Now, I don't have to worry about that anymore, because even if it's ripped, unless I'm standing in a null field, I'll get that stability back just a few seconds later, and I'll be CC immune unless they're dropping a lot of CC on me, and even then, it'll refresh. It's really nice, and the swiftness change is also really nice for just catching targets and doing what Rampage does best, which is punching people in the dirt. Alright, now for the big one. Doliac Signet versus Balance Stance. Which should you use? I know there are a lot of people who are curious on that. I was really curious on it when I initially saw these changes announced way back before the patch. I'll work my way up from small scale to large scale. Starting with 1v1s. I would opt for Balance Stance over Doliac Signet, and here's why. I was actually running out of duration on my stability stack before I was actually running out of stacks themselves. I would very rarely run into a situation in a 1v1 where someone would be able to lay enough CC on me that they could remove the 5 stacks of stability from Balance Stance. That means that the 10 stacks you get from Doliac Signet now would have the same thing happen to them. You would just have more stacks that would get wasted in timeout. So because of the fact that you're running out of duration before running out of stacks in 1v1s, and the fact that Balance Stance, when traded, can give you Vigor, it gives you Swiftness baseline, and has a shorter cooldown baseline than Doliac Signet does traded, and can be traded for longer duration by itself, I would personally opt for Balance Stance over Doliac Signet. Doliac Signet, the only benefits you're getting when it's traded is a shorter cooldown, and baseline, it just gives you some passive toughness. Otherwise, it has a 60-second cooldown if you don't bother with it, as opposed to Balance Stance's 40-second cooldown. Now, moving up into the 1vx territory, or maybe the small skirmish, maybe a 5v5 or whatever, this is the situation where you can choose. This is a situation where you could go either way. If you're in a 1vx and you see that your opponents probably don't have a lot of CC on them, I will still personally opt for Balance Stance because of the extra dodges and swiftness and whatnot. But that being said, if you're going into a 1vx or a skirmish where you see, say, a couple Hammer Warriors, you may want to opt for that Doliac Signet because you're going to be taking a lot more CC, and the likelihood of you actually having all of your stacks removed before they time out is much higher. So in this case, it's up to you. You can either run Balance Stance and get all the perks that I mentioned before, or you could run Doliac Signet, have that extra toughness, and 10 stacks of stability just in case their CC wave goes over 5 stacks. Now, finally, as far as the large-scale frontlining Zerg Guild v Guild warrior gameplay goes, you're definitely going to opt for Doliac Signet. The main reason for this is you're going to be charging headlong into giant walls of CC, be them static fields, fear walls, any number of fields that will CC you if you don't have stability. And with this change, you're going to be losing those stacks real quick. So Balance Stance, you're going to lose that 5 stack instantly, and then you're going to get CC'd and you'll start breaking your front line and start giving the opposing force the ability to break through your front line, get your back line. You want to be as stable as you possibly can while you are pushing your group forward and acting as that front line. So having those 10 stacks will allow you to do that a lot more effectively than just the 5 you would have on Balance Stance. Also, the passive toughness you get from the Signet when you're not using it is handy for adding to that tankiness that you need when you're being a frontlining warrior. So, in summary, Rampage is a lot nicer now. The stability change doesn't really affect our meta builds for PvE and structured PvP. World v World, for 1v1s, I would opt for Balance Stance. For 1vx or skirmishes, you can pick and choose based on your preference. And for large-scale Zerg busting or frontlining, I would advise Doliac Signet. Hopefully this information helped you guys. I was just as curious to find out what the situation with the whole stacking mechanic and which would be better to use was as you. Hopefully this helps you, if not make a decision, helps influence your decision a bit better. So with that, that's going to be it for me for this video, guys. Again, hope it helped. I will see you around the stream or in the next video. Take care, everyone.